Throne of the Tides returns as one of the new dungeons for Mythic Plus in Season 3. The dungeon will start with a 35-minute timer, so as long as you complete the dungeon within that window, you will upgrade your key. At the start of the dungeon, you'll encounter Naz'jar invaders. These mobs will thrash your tank, dealing big upfront physical damage. This can become scary when the mobs enrage with Slithering Assault, increasing their attack and movement speed by 50% for 8 seconds. Vicious snapdragons will fixate on random players with Ravenous Pursuit. While these mobs are CCable during the channel, it will not stop the fixate, so make sure to keep distance from them as their melee attacks inflict a Razor Jaws bleed effect, dealing an absurd amount of damage. Tanks should be very wary of this dot too outside of the fixate. Naz'jar oracles will spam cast Water Bolt at random party members. Interrupt this where you can, but make sure your group saves a kick for their 2 more important casts. Hex will transform a player into a crab for 5 seconds, and the Healing Wave will heal a nearby ally, so make sure that these casts do not go through. The Healing Wave, however, can only be interrupted, as if you stun the mob, it will just instantly cast it again. For this mob alone, you'll need 2 melee kicks to completely lock it down. Sentinels will cast Shellbreaker on the tank. Prepare a defensive for this ability and after, as it leaves a 30% physical damage taken increase on you for 6 seconds. They will also target a random player with Crushing Depths, placing a massive healing absorb debuff on the player that must be out-healed. While the absorb remains, the player will take ticking frost damage. Healers must be on high alert for this cast. Ravagers will fire an Acid Barrage Cone attack towards the tank. Tanks make sure to face this mob away at all times, so the rest of your group doesn't receive the poison debuff. Ravagers will also cast a Volatile Bolt at a player's location that deals huge damage if any players are stood in the targeted zone. Make sure to avoid this swirly. Drudges leap to random players, dealing AoE damage through Leaping Thrash. Players should spread as much as possible here to reduce party damage. Naz'jar Tempest Witches will target random players with Lightning Bolt. Kick this ability where possible to stop the outgoing damage, but if there are oracles present, make sure you're able to kick their Healing Wave. They also apply a magic dot to a random target with Lightning Surge. This inflicts nature damage to them and players within 3 yards of them for 9 seconds. Make sure to spread with this debuff if it's not dispelled. Up the stairs you'll encounter the same mobs we've already dealt with, but due to the Snapdragon patrol, things can get out of hand very quickly. Pull the patrol as it passes between the 2 packs to avoid ninja pulling the rest. You'll need to clear the whole room here, as later we engage a boss in this room. Lady Naz'jar is a relatively straightforward 2-phase encounter. During the first phase, she will target random players with Water Bolt. Interrupt this cast to stop the outgoing damage. Naz'jar will channel a Focused Tempest that deals pulsing damage to 2 random players, so prepare defensives here. She also targets players with Shock Blast, releasing an orb in their direction. The targeted player should take the swirly away from the group so that the rest of the group can dodge the orb that fires out from the impact. You may want to pop a defensive for the initial damage here too. At 60% and 30%, she enters her intermission phase, High Tide. During this phase, multiple adds will spawn that you need to take down in order to phase Lady back in. Guards will need to be picked up by the tank, as they are the only melee add. They will channel Trident Flurry, a frontal cone attack aimed at the tank that players must dodge. Witches will spam cast Frostbolt on random players. Kick this cast so that the mob runs into your group's cleave damage. Both of these mobs buff themselves, which can be dispelled through purges or soothes. Through this phase, try to keep lightly spread so that the Murlocs don't AoE your group down with their Leaping Thrash. During the whole fight, geysers will erupt all over the floor and will likely one-shot you if you're stood in it. Commander Ulthok will cast Crushing Claw on the tank, dealing heavy physical damage and leaving a debuff on the tank that increases damage taken. Make sure to use mitigation for and after this tank buster. Ulthok's main mechanic is Bubbling Fissure, targeting 3 players with shadow damage, knocking them back and leaving behind a pool of bubbling ooze. After this, he'll cast Awaken Ooze, which animates the puddles into adds that fixate on players for 12 seconds. Note that the puddles will follow the oozes in this phase. Every time you deal damage to an ooze, it gets knocked back, so make sure to keep cleaving on them and kite them as much as possible, as the longer the fight goes on, the more oozes you'll have to deal with. Your tank will want to kite the boss around the room to make this fight easier. Festering Shockwave will knock all players back and apply a 12-second dot to everybody that deals heavy shadow damage. Healers should be prepared to out-heal this constant ticking damage. Repeat this until the boss is dead, but make sure it's quick or you'll quickly get overwhelmed. Upon defeating Ulthok, you'll have to pass a gauntlet of electric eels. Dodge the lightning fields they spawn across the room. You can tell when it's about to happen by the antenna lighting up, so either run past or stand in line with the pillars to stay safe. Faceless Watchers will first cast Clenching Tentacles, pulling the whole group in. They'll quickly follow this with a Shadow Smash cast, dealing massive AoE damage in a big targeted zone that your whole group will need to move out from. They also crush the tank, so be wary if pulling multiple at the same time. Faceless Seers will target random party members with Mind Flay. Make sure you interrupt this cast. They will also spawn a Null Blast zone you'll need to move out from. This inflicts big shadow damage and silences players struck. Minions of Ghur'sha will frequently cast Ionic Pulse, dealing moderate AoE damage. Use hard CC to stop these mobs from casting it repeatedly, as they are generally grouped so damage can get out of hand. Mindbender Ghur'sha is a 2-phase encounter, with the first phase lasting from 100 to 25% health. He occasionally summons a Storm Flurry totem that increases his attack speed by 100% and causes additional nature damage from his melee attacks. While this totem is active, the tank must ensure they are using active mitigation, while the rest of your group hard swaps to DPS the totem down. Tanks, this is going to be very scary for you. Ghur'sha will also cast Flame Shock on random targets that will need to be dispelled by the healer ASAP. You can quickly get overwhelmed, so dispel on cooldown. During the first phase, you'll also have to dodge swirlies on the floor from Earth Fury. Upon reaching 25%, the boss will cast Terrifying Vision, which will deal massive party-wide damage and also fear any players within line of sight. Make sure to hide behind the pillars when this cast is finishing to ensure you don't wipe. During this phase, healers will also need to keep on top of the incoming damage from Mind Rot. Guild Goblin Aqua Mages will spam cast Aqua Blast on random targets. This ability hits like a truck, so kick these mobs or CC them where you can. Guild Goblin Hunters will cast Throw Spear at random players. Periodically, they will also throw a Poison Spear at the tank, leaving a 10-second dot that can stack. Unstable Corruptions are little smallies that constantly spawn until the end of the gauntlet. They don't do anything until they explode when they die, applying a stacking wave of corruption debuff to your group that increases shadow damage taken. This isn't deadly itself, but the sentries that are found with these mobs will deal massive shadow damage through their swell channel, pulsing out AoE damage to your group that is very deadly when combined with a debuff. Finally, we encounter Ozumat. The main mechanic of this fight comes from his Blotting Barrage. He targets 3 players, dealing heavy shadow damage and dropping a pool of blotting darkness at each player's location. This pool of ink that deals heavy ticking damage and slows any player stood within it will slowly expand over the course of the fight, eventually filling the room. However, 2 players will also be targeted by Cleansing Flux from Neptulon, granting the chosen players shadow damage immunity and also the ability to slowly purify the inky pools. Players targeted by this beam will need to position themselves inside the ink to ensure maximum reduction of the blotting darkness. Ozumat will also spawn ads that need to be killed and interrupted in a controlled spot, as upon death they also drop blotting darkness. All of these pools should be spawned as tightly as possible to minimize danger. The main aim of this fight is to never fall behind on clearing the pools. This is because the pools slowly shrink, so if you ever fall behind, the bigger pools will take longer to clear and it's just a downward spiral from there. So make sure you completely clear the pools on each phase and you shouldn't face any issues. Ozumat will occasionally let out a Putrid Roar, dealing heavy AoE damage to the party and leaving a dot on them that simply needs to be healed through. Players need to make sure they don't take any extra unnecessary damage from the pools while taking damage here. Upon reaching phase 2, the group is massively buffed by Tidal Surge and Neptulon also channels into the boss for massive damage, so just nuke the boss down from here. But that's it for this boss, and that wraps up Throne of the Tides and Mythic Plus. If this guide did help you or a friend out, then please feel free to drop a like down below and subscribe to your boy. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later.